Thank you for joining us today for the IREX webinar. Today's webinar will be exploring the psychology behind AI video analytics. I'm pleased today to say our guest speaker is Gerron Cooper. Gerron is a board certified behavior analyst whose primary focus is on identification of problem behaviors. Gerron has a master's degree in applied behavior analysis from the Chicago School of Professional Psychology. So as the world's forever changing, Gerron's positioned himself very well to use his expertise to help develop some of the world's leading AI video analytics. At IREX, Gerron provides an invaluable component in the development of AI-powered surveillance alerts, which assist cities, law enforcement, and more around the world. So Gerron, it's great to have you here today.
Thank you, Daniel. It's nice to be here. And good afternoon to everyone else.
Brilliant. So, Gerron, I'm just going to jump straight into the first question for you. So, can you give kind of an outlook on a general outlook on where psychology and AI, in particular AI video alerts, are today?
Absolutely. So when we look at psychology and its kind of intersectionality with video analytics, we see that there is a lot of overlap that is going to happen and that there continues to happen, because in order to necessarily predict or influence behaviors that we want to see from the video analytics, we have to first understand how people behave, motivation, different things like that. So it will take a large amount of data, a large amount of research and practice before we actually get everything correct. But I think we're moving on the right page.
When you first started doing your master's at the Chicago School of Professional Psychology, did you envisage the impact what psychology will have on AI moving forward?
Honestly, not at all. When I first started, I could not imagine being on this call right now. Like, it is amazing how far we have come in such a short amount of time. And I'm really looking forward to seeing what we achieve in the future.
Yeah, as we've seen in recent events, predominantly around the United States in the last few weeks, one of the components when reacting to emergency situations is the psychology of those that have been affected, those that have witnessed in emergency situations. Would you like to just talk about the psychology of when people are dealing with those emergency situations?
Yeah. So when we look at, and it's been far too many of these incidences happening over the last few months, but when we look at people's reactions, how they react to these situations, we see a large amount of stress, anxiety, different things of that nature. And I know we'll get to this further along, but when we look at how we react to the conversation, to how video analysts could have helped prevent some of these things, psychology is going to be crucial to determine how we observe these, how we identify, because at the end of the day, what we're trying to do is get a machine to view things how we would, right? A machine that can think like a human, but at a much faster speed, which would allow them to make these judgment calls much faster than we can, process more information. But first, we have to take a step back and do a lot of what we call grunt work, the research into looking at what these different behaviors consist of, what different behaviors look like across different cultures. So it's going to take a lot of research and a lot of data to ensure that we are creating the most ethical AI systems.
Yeah, I mean, that's a great point. I don't know which angle to go at first. I think that you're absolutely right in terms of the neural networks, the machine learning, being able to provide real-time alerts. But you bring up a fantastic point. Different cultures, different regions around the world people react differently as well. So in regards to that, it's extremely important. And could you like expand upon the psychology in different regions and possibly any examples of how people react differently?
Yeah, yeah. So if we just even taking a step back before we even get to how people react, it's based on how we define behaviors. Different behaviors across different regions, different cultures, different subcultures are all going to be different. So if I were to say, what does punching look like to all the people on this call, I'm sure that we can all come up with different definitions of what that may look like. But but for a machine and for its purpose of learning and incorporating that into video analytics, there needs to be a clear, defined definition. And then as we add and feed in more data to the machine, to the algorithms, then that's where the adjustments are made based on culture, based on uh, different regions, and so on and so forth. So it really, the big point is that we have to ensure that we are taking into account cultural and social norms, because what we don't want to do is create a system that is heavily focused on one culture while heavily dismissing another. And therefore, that's where biases and systems come. And then one group of people is either over police or over analyzed while another is not. So we want to make sure that there's a clear, equitable understanding of what behaviors are, different regions, and how they therefore impact future behavior going forward.
Yeah, absolutely. So, so kind of in a nutshell, those that are developing the neural networks, you have to ensure that there's diversity, because obviously if only one subsect of a certain culture is developing the neural networks, developing the behavior alerts, that could be an issue.
Absolutely. Like it goes beyond that in the sense of taking the bias out of the algorithms and making sure that we are, like I said before, equitable and using and being culturally sensitive in terms of how we program and how we ensure that these machines learn at the base level. And as machine learning grows and the neural networks develop, the machine will start to pick up on certain patterns, certain cultural clues, things like that. But in the very beginning, as we do that baseline code, it's important that we try to incorporate as much data as we can.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think that obviously the development of any AI and neural networks, it's all about the data, isn't it? And you touched on bias and so forth there. So in the creation of AI video analytics and so forth, how important now is psychology then?
So I think psychology is just, if not more important than the machine learning, the technical aspect, because it's going to be those non-technical skills that will lead to the development of those technical skills. The data, the machine is only going to learn as well or as good as the data. So in order to create the most ethical and the most accurate machine processes, we have to ensure that we are giving it the best, most accurate, most reliable data. So psychology, I think psychology is going to be up there with, I thought, like I said, the technical skills to ensure that we are incorporating because we're trying to teach a machine how to learn as a human, how to infer. Uh, Machines do a great job of deductive, so 2 + 2 is 4. But in terms of those other skills that we as humans take for granted, like we can see something and we may get a feeling or an inkling, machine doesn't have that. So understanding where that feeling or inkling comes from And typically it comes from us relying on maybe a past experience, informing a future decision based on something that we have either witnessed ourselves or have seen. And so we make okay, this is similar to that in this way, but not similar to that in this way. And then we make that distinction. So human beings, we're pretty good about making these types of inferences on the fly, and it comes natural to us just because of the way our brains are set up. But in order to replicate that in a machine, that's going to take a lot more methodical planning and data analysis.
Yeah, you bring up a great point as well, where you talk about how the neural networks, the machine learning, 2 + 2 = 4. And obviously, people are a lot more complex than that. So in regards to things like emergency situations, when you've got first responders and law enforcement responding to an emergency situation within a city or elsewhere, how is the psychology of people, and how can machine learning influence and help those first responders?
So in regards to how psychology is involved in this, we have to take a look at, obviously during crisis situations, there are high levels of anxiety, stress, adrenaline is coursing through first responders, making them more hyper aware, more hyper vigilant of certain things, quicker reactions, things of that nature. So understanding that, and then also incorporating, you have all the added external variables or external factors going on of, is this a large metropolitan area? So there are innocent civilians around. There are other things to be aware of while doing this. So to understand, to get a machine to a point to understand all of this, we have to start off piece by piece, start off with one variable, then add another, then another. Whereas that's easier said than done, but understanding that in the long run, it's going to be best in helping the machine learn to get up to speed into how we as humans learn, how we as humans react. And on top of that, we have to show or design systems that show a machine how human beings react in certain situations. Because again, they're having to figure out not just in terms of machine, not what to do, but also how their action is going to have a reaction from other people. And so taking in all that data to make informed decisions and choices is going to be very important. And in terms of the first responders, they're going to need this information at a rapid pace to make accurate decisions for themselves in the field, on the ground. So it's going to be very important that we get things right and ensure that we have to do, like I said before, we have to do the groundwork on the front end to ensure that we're designing the best system.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that you can go back to the statistic where 80% of eyewitness accounts are incorrect. So when you're talking about the psychology of first responders getting there, and they're using that data, the data what they're getting is 80% incorrect at times. So it seems like it's a collaboration, but it needs to be done, like you said, ethically. So they need to, AI can give the alerts, which is 1 + 1 = 2, and it can give that evidence-based information where it's not emotionally charged. How do you think society will accept the use of AI being deployed, especially in surveillance cameras, optical sensors, and so forth?
I think people will understand. I know ideally it'll the hope is to launch in those major areas, so weapon detection, violent crimes, missing children, things like that nature, to build that trust, quote unquote, with the public, to say this system, when properly designed, is very beneficial for the greater good in society. If we even take a deeper look, AI is should be used to make our lives easier. Now, now we get into the thing of invasion of privacy and other things of that nature, which I understand it's a valid concern for some. But when we look at the risk versus the reward, there's still going to be checks and balances. I think that's the most important part. Every system has its checks and balances. No system is just going to be totally autonomous, especially a system that is learning, that is evolving before our very eyes. So there definitely will be the checks and balances to ensure that nothing ever goes off the rails. But my personal opinion is that psychology, AI, society will all live happily under one roof or one world, similar to every modern marvel, from the airplane, self-driving cars, Alexa, all of these systems we have in our homes today. So I think it's just going to take time, and it's going to take some time to build that trust.
Yeah, absolutely. Like, I know you bring up the great points where you talk about trust, being ethical and so forth, because it's also on the flip side, isn't it? If you are involving psychology, having diverse data in terms of the creation of these AI modules, but then there's the flip side of the user, isn't there? And where do you think the psychology will play in the role of the user as well? Because that falls into society, isn't it? Because I think that most people will agree, especially in the United States right now, there is such a gap between society and law enforcement / government in terms of trust. So how do you think all this kind of whirlwind will come and play out?
Yeah, no, great question. Like I said, in terms of trust, I think it takes time. It will require some effort on the users the user front to give it a chance. When they're just knocking things down, but also in terms of the other user, to use it ethically. We're not invading anyone's privacy. We're not amassing large amounts of data and then selling it, things like that. So just ensuring that we are giving society a positive outlook on the use of AI, especially for, like I said before, some of the other more kind of universally accepted reasons, finding missing children, violent texts and major crimes, hunting down fugitives, warrants, things like that, facial recognition. So I think it's just going to be there are going to be some growing pains. I anticipate that there will be a lot of misconceptions. I think that's another big piece. Knowledge, actual understanding of what AI is. Not the Terminator. That's not how it works. But it is definitely a artificial intelligence that we should use to help us solve some of our most pressing societal challenges.
Yeah, because you bring a good point, because like when you talk about development of AI modules, when it comes to things like, which are very mundane, which play into the neural network's favor, like let's say unattended items, you know, things like that, where there's that psychology not involved, or it's often than not vehicle analytics. Of course, there is some components to psychology when it comes to vehicle analytics, but when it comes to license plate recognition, things like that, I think now that we're opening this new realm of people analytics, this is where psychology comes into play. And in terms of the analytics which can be ran, you spoke earlier about how a specific action may be different amongst different cultures. You spoke before about, I've heard it, where you're saying there is no such thing as a blanket AI module, especially a blanket people AI module. Would you like to just expand on that a little bit?
Yeah, I think you kind of summed it up in your last sentence. There's no blanket AI and there's no blanket person. There's uh, everyone on this call is different. If we react different based on our learning histories, our childhoods, our experiences, our levels of education, our everything. So there's so many factors and variables that go into our reactions to things. It's only right that we have an AI that understands that and applies that type of understanding and learning to its analytic programming. And so it's very important that we create systems that have that diversity of thought, understanding that human beings are different, that just because person A reacts like this, person B may not. And so working at a baseline to understand, okay, there are some commonalities across most cultures. I will submit to that. Some common trends across cultures, regions, things of that. So I think that's the starting point in terms of building up definitions of behavior and some of the ground levels of software, taking those universal kind of behaviors and then building it up from there and allowing the machine to learn to discriminate or generalize in some cases to further its development.
Yeah, and then it's all about triggering the alerts to a human at this moment in time. I think what common misconception is that AI will then make the decision. And I don't think that is the case right now.
Yes, so definitely AI is interpreting data, it's analyzing data, it then sends an alert to, again, I talked earlier about checks and balances, to that balance, to a person. I don't know if we'll ever get to a point where, again, it'll be totally autonomous. Maybe for certain instances, you said something similar like the license plate reader or unattended baggage or a weapon. I know that's another like identification of a weapon through video analysis. So something that's very clear, concrete, and concise, which for things that are a little bit more subjective and require a little bit more of that inference, I think there's still the need for the human component on the back end.
Yeah, and I know that's something that you've been heavily involved with as well. In terms of weapon detection, is obviously a huge AI module which will be beneficial across the US especially, as well as the neural networks being able to trigger an alert, for a specific weapon. It can detect, actually, that looks like a handgun, let's trigger an alert. But also, staying on just weapon detection, there is similar, that falls underneath psychology as well, doesn't it? Because the mannerisms in terms of the positions an individual might get in, because surveillance cameras, obviously, the best way to describe it often than not is if a human can detect it from looking under surveillance, the AI can. But often than not, if an individual gets in a specific pose, a position, which is similar to, let's say, an AK-47 or a heavy weapon like that, the psychology obviously plays a role in the development of these modules.
It does. Even going a step further, I'm using the United States as an example. Weapon detection is a complicated fact because you have different states have different gun laws. Some states are open carry, some states are concealed. So that's also going to play a factor into getting those an AI giving those alerts. Because if it's just because a person has a weapon on them doesn't necessarily mean they're a threat in a open carry state. Things get a little bit more tricky when we look at proximity to, let's say, proximity to schools, airports, churches, concert venues, things like that. So that's a little bit more in the coding. We talk about proximity alerts, so on and so forth. But it's definitely an avenue that needs to be addressed, especially given the last few months. And I'm just excited to be a part of this work.
Yeah, and I think that one thing that you've touched on, and we haven't spoke about too much, which a lot of people obviously discuss and always got an opinion on, is people analytics in terms of recognition of recognizing an individual. Where do you think we are with obviously the neural network training of that is all about the data sets in terms of this, the psychology and so forth. I believe that it's a lot in terms of how society will accept this. I know that you've been working a lot with this component of it. So in regards to that, it seems, like I said, it seems everybody has an opinion on it. How do you see it playing out from a psychologist's point of view?
From a psychologist point of view, I see it again playing out. Everyone's always going to have their own opinion, the way they feel, just based on their inherent feelings. When we look at, I think if you log into Facebook right now, you upload a picture, Facebook uses a facial recognition to identify if you would like to tag this person in a photo. So the information is already out there. It's already being used in these ways. I think this is just a evolution of the use of that data. And it's in terms of law enforcement using facial recognition to apprehend fugitives, people with warrants, criminals, that aspect. Generally, I don't know if many people are going to have a big an issue as with that. I think it's also, again, with the trust and it being abused in different ways. So psychologically speaking, it depends vastly on the rapport, the trust that's been built up with society and law enforcement. And right now that's questionable at best.
Yeah, absolutely. So I definitely think that it has to be the platform, the technology has to be transparent, meaning
Yes.
that every user is logged and can be audited. Often than not, hopefully, that it's a collaboration between the public and private sector and the communities in where it's deployed to ensure that it is the correct use of the technology. I think that is one component. So from the site, from society's point of view, what do you think society will accept in terms of using, because obviously recognition of individuals, I think that everybody's scared of this Orwellian type future where you don't want to get triggered, you don't want to receive an triggered an alert if you've got an outstanding parking ticket. So in regards to society, where do you think is the cutoff point? Where do you think that, because with all new technology, there's good and there's bad. We have to find the balance that it brings more good than bad. I mean, it's just like you go back to cell phones, don't you? Like, it's great, we can contact anybody we want all the time, but also anybody can contact us at any time of the day if we've got obviously our cell phone on us. So in regards to using that revolutionary technology, where we are now in society, what do you think the cutoff point is to use it?
Yeah, no, you bring up some really great points. I would like, technology in and of itself is never good, never bad. It's just technology. It always depends on how the user uses the technology, right? So in terms of, again, I always go back to missing children, fugitives, those kind of universally accepted, well, that would be, we would hope would be universally accepted as ethical reasons for recognition, facial recognition using AI software. I think it's, we've talked about it numerous times today, the transparency of it, the ethicalness of it, and how it's used, and making sure that we are not abusing the system, for lack of a better word, and ensuring that society we are being transparent in how, where, and what we choose to do with this software. And so I think if AI is rolled out and it has shown its usefulness in major ways, and then we slowly introduce more uses of the software, I think society would have a better understanding, one, and a better reaction. I do fear that if it is just thrust on society as a, this is the solution, here you go, with no kind of warming up process, I think that can be a much more difficult assimilation.
Yeah, in regards to society and missing children, I believe that if the technology is purely only used for that, I think that 99% of society would probably agree with it. One thing which is quite important as well with the missing children aspect is I remember a high-profile case in the United Kingdom regarding Madeleine McCann. She was a young Caucasian girl that went missing, and her face was plastered literally in every country in the world. There were sites of her, in Peru, sites of her in Russia, everywhere in the world. And I believe that obviously now with the use of technology, being able to trigger alerts if these children ever appear under surveillance, obviously from hotspots, what may be borders, maybe train stations, transportation hubs inside cities, grocery stores, things like that. If it's only used for that attribute, what I'm getting at is that it will be the same across the board. No matter whose child goes missing, the same technology will be available for them.
Yes, and yeah, it definitely levels the playing field in terms of those who have access to different levels of resources.
Yeah, and obviously in regards to the resources available, you'd be able to connect, hopefully, to cameras in crucial areas within cities and states that never sleep. And it adds another dimension in regards to the fight, even against things like human trafficking as well, which I know even now Joe Rogan is speaking about on his podcast, which is something which is swept under the rug at this moment in time. And I think that human trafficking is something which AI can definitely assist with. And I believe now that human trafficking has just overtaken illegal firearms in terms of the revenue it generates. So you're talking billions and billions of dollars it generates in the US per year.
Yes, and the added benefit with facial recognition and data and AI analytics is that you are able to make better, not guesses, but get better results from a smaller. So if instead of you needing a full frontal picture, you can maybe get a half a face and you can compare it to a standing picture of a person and get a 98% match. And that way you're able to get a larger range of suggestions.
Yeah, and I think that it falls back underneath the AI can fill in the gaps which humans don't, and it is doing right now around the world. And obviously, it's just been able to bring as many success stories as we can. Because if we go back to our earlier discussion where we talked about can law enforcement and first responders trust the eyewitness accounts to begin with.
Yeah.
When there is a missing child in a state, everybody wants to be that person that finds them, don't? Well, most people want to find that person. The psychology can play a role in that as well, can't it? And really affect the operations.
Yes, and even beyond that, I know we touched about it previously, but when we look at eyewitness accounts for maybe a crime or something, eyewitness accounts are historically unreliable. People, when we have anxiety, we have stress, people fill in gaps in terms of information. So it's very, AI can be the very succinct, like this is what happened, this is what was seen. They may even have a video stored where you can get an accurate depiction of what happened versus trying to rely on an eyewitness account that can be misleading or just downright inaccurate. So it definitely plays a role in AI, even psychology, in understanding how we can help society in so many different ways.
So yeah, I know that we're getting closer to time right now, but it is fascinating, and
It is.
I'm lucky that we get to talk all the time. You're doing great things.
We appreciate
Right
that.
now, like you're obviously a bit of a trailblazer in terms of what you're doing, in terms of your background. How do you see it? We've spoke about the importance of psychology and AI. How do you see it growing, and do you think that there's going to be pushback? Because with change, there's always pushback and there's always scrutiny. So how do you see this new kind of marriage evolving in terms of between AI and psychology?
I think I foresee it being a very rocky marriage in the beginning, but once you go to therapy a couple of times, once you get it, some of the kinks worked out, I think it's going to be smooth sailing. Um, we are, like you said, we're working on cutting edge technology. Technology is evolving every day, so there will be that learning curve. There will be adjustments to be made. So I don't want anyone to ever expect, oh, there's going to be a perfect system on the first rollout. No, everything will need to be adjusted, will need to be managed to ensure that everything is running accordingly. But I see psychology playing a leading, if not co-lead role in the development of ethical AI, video analytics, to ensure that we are, because at the same, we're trying to replicate what human beings already do. So it is important that we take that on the people who understand human beings as much as anyone understands anyone to then inform those decisions being made with in terms of programming and the AI learning paths and the neural networks.
Brilliant. All right. Well, I think I'm going to end the webinar here. Gerron, fantastic. I think we'll do another one of these again soon. Unfortunately, I got a lot of emails saying a few people are trying to get in, but that's the beauty of the recording. So thanks for attending, everybody. There'll be a recorded version which will be distributed late the back end of this week. And Gerron, thank you for everything. And you're doing revolutionary things. It's fantastic to see obviously a fellow ex-soccer player as well doing great things with psychology, doing revolutionary things with AI. So it's been a pleasure having you here.
Thank you, Daniel. It's been great to be here, and thank you everyone for coming out.